Hello, welcome back to Gardener's World. Now, I don't know about you, but it has been a horrendously wet winter here at Longmeadow, the wettest ever recorded. We've had floods right up to where I am now. You can still see there's a little bit of flooding in the background. And our house has been lucky. We haven't been flooded, but I do know that a lot of people in this area have had terrible floods to contend with. So it's been a tough time. But the garden seems to have come through unscathed. There's a real feeling of spring in the air, things are growing fast, there's a freshness, and certainly now is the time to do a whole host of jobs. And what I'm doing at the moment is lifting this iris. This is Iris sibirica that likes wet conditions. It has lovely little blue flowers in June. It's really vibrant, but you can see from here that it's formed a kind of donut, a circle, with a sort of empty space in the middle, and that's very typical of herbaceous plants. You plant them as a clump, they grow outwards like that with the new parts on the outside, and the middle, the oldest bit, can hollow out. So every 2, 3, 4 years, depending on the plant, it's a good idea to lift them, divide them up, and then create yourself some new plants. And the time to do this is right now when you see good, strong growth, and the plant will hardly know that it's been lifted. And you can see if I lift this part, let's hoik that out, that is the middle. So I could just chop that off. And you can see it's really, really hard. And this now is a nice, good, healthy clump that will grow strongly. I have to say it's very nice to get my hands back in the soil. This is the first day it hasn't rained for ages. It's good to be back in the garden. In today's program, Frances immerses herself in houseplant heaven at a unique display at RHS Wisley. And we meet a gardener in Somerset who is simply potty about pots. Nellie, we're going left. Good girl. Come on. The writing garden has kept out the water. This hasn't flooded. And it's starting to really grow. We've got all the new growth of the daffodils. This is Thalia, that lovely ivory-coloured daffodil, and also the summer snowflakes, Leucojum. And they're coming through, and they should be flowering over the next few weeks. And by and large, we've done most of the pruning in the garden. We try and get that done if it's at all dry around about February, but I haven't pruned the roses in here, and it's not too late to prune roses of any kind other than ramblers. So climbers, hybrid teas, shrub roses, you can prune those now without any harm. And quite a few people have noticed that their roses have kept their leaves all winter long. And they've asked, should you still prune them? And the answer is yes. If they've kept their leaves, it's simply because it's been so mild. As a rule of thumb, I always cut back my roses by about a third. Now, this rose, a shrub rose, is Rosa alba semiplena with white flowers in June and July. And this is typical of how it grows, because you can see there's a tangle of growth here, and also this, which is a new stem from the base. Now, on a shrub rose like this, you don't want one great arching one like that. So I'm going to cut this right back to there, and that will encourage it to shoot sideways. Now, the next thing to do is to clear the tangle a bit. You can see here, for example, we've got two stems crossing. Now, those will rub together, and where they rub, they can cause a wound, and where you get that, you're more likely to get infection. So one of those two has to go, and I think it's going to be the smaller one, and this is quite prickly. Okay, let's go right back in there and pull that out. I have got a glove, actually, which I might, just might, resort to using. Right, that comes out. So what I'm trying to do is just to clear anything crossing, anything looking diseased or broken or growing too much inwards. So, for example, we can take that back and this. These are strong shoots, nice strong growth there. This here is much more flimsy, it's weedy. And that's what you need to cut back hard. Cut it right back, and then the new growth will have the energy. So just create a nice open framework where there's lots of air, so we won't have to worry so much about fungal problems. And then you'll get plenty of new growth coming very quickly at this time of year, and that is what will carry the flowers. There's only one type of rose that is going to suffer if you prune it now, and those are rambling roses. And they invariably are vigorous, have small flowers in June and July, and they're likely to be growing up a wall or a tree. All other roses produce their flowers on new growth. So whatever you cut off is not a problem, because the new growth that replaces it will have flowers. Now, I said how lovely it is to get back outside into the garden with some fresh air and birdsong after a winter of staring at the rain. But at least I've got a garden to get back outside into, whereas increasingly, particularly young people, do not have access to gardens. And this has resulted in an enormous increase of interest in houseplants. And certainly, we at home have got lots more over the last few years. And the RHS put on a temporary display this winter at Wisley. And before it closed, Francis went along to have a look.
When I was a student up in Scotland, I had one lone peace lily in a pot, and it came with me to every room in the house. And now, never having had my own proper garden, the collection of houseplants I have has grown to probably about 50. I absolutely love them. Houseplants, as we know them, are basically outdoor plants that come from hot, dry, or tropical countries. They couldn't cope out in a wintry UK garden, but they can thrive in our homes. There's lots to choose from. So it means there are plants for every room, from a dark, shady hallway to a bright, airy kitchen. And I hear that this exhibition provides some incredible inspiration for what you can do with them in your home. It's based on an abandoned house where the plants have taken over. So the dining room, bathroom, lounge, and even the bedroom have plants erupting from every cranny. Danielle Warner is one of the creators. So you were in charge of the dining room?
Yes.
How did you come up with these ideas?
Well, luckily I've got a great team on the Glasshouse team, and we all kind of contributed ideas. As we brought the props, more ideas came to light, such as the Echeveria cake. It's really nice to be able to use plants in a way you wouldn't necessarily get to use them otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's nice, it's a way that you could actually replicate at home yourself if you've got, you know, pots and pans lying around that you don't use, so.
And the chairs are spectacular. How do you go about kind of designing and making these?
We pretty much made them up as we went along, just picked a selection of plants, had a look at what worked well together, tried to use different textures and colours, tried to give them all their own personality.
Totally. I like the spiky toddler.
Yeah, I really like that. I just quite like the shape of it. It looks like a baby kind of waving his arms and screaming.
I think it's great. And why is that one there knocked over?
So that was meant to be kind of a stroppy teenager who's stormed away from the table and just knocked the chair over. Yeah, doesn't really want to sit with the rest of the family for dinner.
Fair enough. Yeah. Families can be tricky.
Yes, they can.
While succulents hail from bright, arid areas, the lounge is full of plants from damp forest floors, which means they can handle lower light levels with their broad leaves. But they don't all have to be big. This is a miniature version of the Swiss cheese plant that we all know and love. And at home, Mine trails down shelves just like this, looking beautiful. In fact, this whole exhibition is filled with amazing inspirational little pots, ways you can use your furniture. Makes you want to get planting. Stairs and their banisters make a perfect frame for eager climbers. But the bedroom is more airy. This really takes the idea of a flower bed to a whole new place. It's a four-poster filled to the brim with all different kinds of bromeliads. Now, bromeliads in the wild have evolved to grow as epiphytes, which means they grow on the bark of trees. So their roots and the water that falls into the leaf in their rosette formation is where they get their nutrients and their water from. So when you grow them at home, make sure you keep watering them into the plant itself. And in terms of compost, mix that with a lot of orchid bark because it will stop the roots from getting too waterlogged. The most famous bromeliad is probably the pineapple, and they're right here on top of the bedposts. And that is a nice touch. The bathroom is full of moisture-loving plants like ferns, but they don't have to stay grounded. This is one of my favourite things in this exhibition because it makes such a great use of vertical space, so any sized house could have one of these. It also shows how versatile ferns can be. They grow in the ground, but also in the cracks of this lovely piece of bark. Perfect for a nice, moist bathroom. These ferns need soil to grow in, and it's cleverly packed behind the bark. For these living pictures, the soil is hidden in the depths of the box frame, with a covering of wire netting, so the plants can grow through. It's so inspiring to see houseplants used creatively. Yet we know they're not just beautiful decorations. They're also living, breathing species, and looking after them and growing them in our homes is as good for our well-being as it is for theirs. And with that in mind, I've got one for my mum on Mother's Day and one for me as well.
I know that that exhibition was really popular and successful, so hopefully they'll do it again next year and we can all go and see it. Now, I am fairly new to houseplants. This is something that has grown on me over the last few years, and gradually I've got interested. So this is new territory for me. But there are certain things that apply in whatever type of houseplants you want to grow, and they are all based on sound common sense. The first thing is to find out where a plant comes from. So, for example, if you have desert plants like cactus or succulents, give them lots of bright sunlight, and the worst thing you can do is overwater them. For example, these succulents that we have here, we only water in September or early October, and then not again until spring. However, if you have plants that like jungle or shade, like a lot of these, we've got ferns, we've got spider plants, they will need to be in some shade and also moisture. But the crucial thing is not so much moisture to the roots, but moisture in the air. So the first thing anybody who's getting any foliage houseplants should get is a good size sprayer and give them a really good spray. That means you've got to put them somewhere where the spray is not going to damage soft furnishings or a carpet or electrical units or whatever it might be. If you want to repot them, rather like putting them in the light or in the shade, you need to know what type of plant it is. So if you've got a succulent or a cacti, it's going to need really good drainage. And I've made a mix here, which is pretty much 50% coir, 50% grit. On the other hand, if you've got a plant like this ficus that are fundamentally about foliage, I've got a very different mix. You need something that will hold moisture a little bit better. And so this is a peat-free compost mixed up with a little bit of leaf mould and a little bit of grit. Now, you can buy proprietary houseplant composts, and that's fine, except for the fact that a lot of them do include peat, and I see no reason ever to use peat. In fact, that's a subject that we are going to look at much more closely over the coming weeks, but that's to come. Now, I've got a Calathea here that I want to repot. You can see here it's got these really striking markings on the foliage. This is a jungle floor plant. It likes to be moist, but not soaking wet. A little bit in the bottom. Put the roots like that. Just ease some compost around it. Push it down with your fingers. And then just gently pull it up a bit and shake it. And that will work the soil around the roots. Give them a little water, and that is now good to go for the rest of the summer. A lot of people I know are very worried because they see little black flies on their houseplants, and this is the scarab fly. They thrive in damp soils, but don't worry, they do little harm to your plants. But to keep them at bay, avoid overwatering and allow the soil surface to dry out completely in between waterings. We will be looking at houseplants a lot more this year and celebrating them for all their beauty and variety. Now, last May, we went to Conisbury in Somerset and visited a gardener who's growing her plants in pots, but outside. And most of us who garden have some pots. But she has lots and lots and lots of pots.
I just counted all my pots. There are 1,259. They say I'm potty. My name is Julia Thayer. I have 2 children and my husband lives here, but I do all the gardening. We moved here about 20 years ago from Surrey. We came with 300 pot plants. These are all my box plants that I grew from cuttings, and I had nowhere to put them as they grew bigger and bigger, and I cut them into different shapes. I've put them in front of the garage on the drive, but there you go. I've got some of my mum's pots, my sister's pots. The children have given me pots, my husband has given me pots. So I do have great attachment to them. I have big ones and small ones. I really have enormous ones. I've piled the plants up onto staging. There are pots under there, barrels, there's breeze block, all sorts of stuff in there. I just put them in colour formation, so there's purples here, red foliage of the hydrangeas and the hebe, and the phormium here. This is a small phormium. I had a phormium that I thought was going to be small. It's actually landed up enormous. All these are in a pot, including the trees. So it's bonkers. I've put in a lot of flowering plants, roses. I tend to go for the old roses that only last a couple of weeks and then they're gone. I go for the leaves as well as the colour. When a plant is in a pot, it looks so different from when it's in a border. It just lifts it, makes it look special because it's got more drama in a pot. They do well in pots. I look after them better there. They seem to die in the border. And I've discovered recently, I just love potting. If I'm feeling low, I just do a bit of potting and I'm feeling happy again. It's really good. Good for the mind. Watering is a major operation every evening. It takes an hour and a half to 2 hours. I have 16 water butts and 21 dipping barrels scattered throughout the garden. I have hoses connecting them all with a drip system, and I can dip and go, and I don't have to turn taps on or wait for it to fill. And so mostly the plants get rainwater. My mum was absolutely potty about pots. She didn't have as many as mine, but she did have 700. She counted them once. This is supposed to be my tropical south of France area. We'd just been to the south of France and I looked at all the windows and took photographs of them, and I thought, I'm going to make one of those. This is the pew that I put a top on to keep it dry, and this is made of an old dog kennel. This year, the pelargoniums are looking really good in the conservatory. In previous years, I've tried watering far less in the winter, and they've looked ever so dead, and I've lost a few of them. But this year, I watered all winter, and they've done really well. They've looked nicer, they've looked alive, and now they're coming on really well.
Most people have a conservatory on a sunny day like today for sitting, socialising, eating. Ours is usually a jungle. You need a machete to get from one door to another. The garden has become her canvas. I see it's a very useful recreation area, which Julia just happens to make beautiful for me.
It's just lovely. We love it. I'm really trying to cut back on the number of pots because I think I've got totally enough now. But I probably won't resist. No, I'll probably buy another one.
Well, I thought I had a lot of pots, but absolutely nothing like the amount that Julia's got. But I am a great fan of growing things in pots because apart from anything else, you can move them around, you can create displays, and it does mean that you can take things out as they're finishing. For instance, I've got some iris here. This is Iris Fabiola. They finished flowering. I'm just deadheading them before I move them because I don't want them to set seed, but don't cut back the foliage. With all bulbs, you let the foliage die back naturally, and that feeds into the bulb so they will flower next year. Now, all these bulbs were planted last autumn, but now we've come to that time of year where we want to be planning for summer. One of the things I love most about spring is seed sowing, because there's so much hope and possibility inherent in it. And if you're not used to growing plants from seed, we'll start now. It's cheap, it's easy, and if it doesn't work, well, you've lost a packet of seeds, and that's a lot cheaper than just losing one plant. I want to sow some tomatoes. I've got a compost made of coir, a little bit of leaf mould, a little bit of garden compost, a little bit of perlite, but if you just buy a general purpose peat-free compost, that'll do fine. Got a number of seeds. I've got one called Costoluto Fiorentino, which is a really good ribbed beefsteak tomato, and it's fantastic as part of a salad, but it's a meaty, chunky thing. Right, not a lot there. Let's do the trick where you just lick the end of a pencil, and the seed should stick to it like that, and then you can place it. And I'm spacing them out, because although we'll prick them out later, with all seeds, from the moment you sow it, it makes a difference to how it will perform later on. So if it develops well from day one, it's going to benefit months later. Now I'm just going to press that down, and the reason I do that is just to make sure that there's good contact between the seed and soil. Cover it with a thin layer of compost through a sieve, and if you haven't got a sieve, you can just either sprinkle some on or use a little bit of vermiculite if you've got it. Press that down again, put a label. The latest that I'd want to sow tomatoes would be the end of April, because after that there isn't enough time for them to grow and then set fruit and ripen. But you've could sow some now and then sow another batch in a month's time, and that will stagger the harvest. The next one I want to sow is called Kuo de Bue, which means ox heart. It's heart-shaped, and it's sort of halfway between a smaller tomato and a beefsteak. Now, these I'm going to sprinkle because there's enough of them. Right, press them down again, like that, cover them over. There we go. Okay, next stage is to take these to the greenhouse and water them. And in order to germinate, these do need some heat. If you haven't got a heated mat or a greenhouse, then it wants to be a windowsill, preferably above a radiator. Right, that's one job done. Now, for the first time this year, but not the last, here are your jobs for the weekend. After spending a winter on a windowsill or in a greenhouse, pelargoniums are looking a little worse for wear, but they are beginning to grow vigorously, and now is a good time to cut them back. Prune them hard, leaving a shoot beneath the pruning point, and then the new growth will be much fresher and more vigorous. And you can make new plants by putting some of your prunings into a jar of water, and very quickly they'll grow roots. If you haven't done so already, it's time to cut back all deciduous grasses. Take them right back down to the ground so the new shoots can grow through. And if you've got evergreen grasses, don't cut these back. Just tidy up any dead material. Even if the soil is still too wet to plant potatoes, it's a good idea to chit them, and this gets them off to a good start. Put the seed potatoes in egg boxes or seed trays, and then put them somewhere bright but frost-free. They will develop nice stubby shoots, ready to explode into action when you do get around to planting them. Well, despite it being a funny old winter, the garden is looking good, and the daffodils, for example, here on the mound, these are the native Pseudonarcissus, have never been better. And today is the spring equinox, which means that from tomorrow, we've got more day than night. And every day that light is stretching out. But we can't stretch the program out anymore, I'm afraid. That's it for today, but I will be back here at the same time next week. So until then, bye-bye.